Veteran moved into his grandmother's mountain cabin, what his dog uncovered. Inside shocked the locals. Rain trailed across the windshield like thin silver scars, blurring the Wyoming ridgeline into a smear of gray and shadow. Ethan Cole tightened his grip on the steering wheel, knuckles pale under the worn leather. His breath fogged the cold air inside the truck, but he barely noticed. The letter sat on the passenger seat, creased from the number of times he had opened it, read it, folded it again. Evelyn Cole, his grandmother, gone, and the cabin on Arrow Ridge was now his. Hawk stirred beside him, the Belgian Malinois sitting upright in the back seat like a sentry on permanent duty. His amber eyes didn't blink, didn't drift. They stayed fixed on the narrow dirt road climbing toward the ridge. Every bump made his muscles tighten, ready for something Ethan couldn't yet see. Ethan cleared his throat. "Cabin, huh? Hope you like old wood and bad insulation." Hawk didn't look at him. Instead, the dog's ears flicked sharply to the side, toward the forest pressing close against the road. A low rumble built in his chest. Not a bark, a warning. Yeah, I hear it too. Wind hissed through the pines. A shadow moved deeper between the trees, too fast to follow, too soft to be deer. Ethan slowed the truck. The road twisted upward until finally the trees parted, revealing the clearing. Arrow Ridge cabin. It looked smaller than he remembered. Weather-beaten, slumped under decades of storms. The porch sagged to one side, and a sheet of tin roofing flapped with each gust, clanging like a loose bell. Hawk was standing before the truck even stopped. His paws thudded against the window as he scanned the clearing. The second Ethan opened the door, Hawk bolted out, landing in the mud and sprinting straight toward the cabin. His bark wasn't frantic. It was methodical. One sharp sound at the porch, another at the window, a growl at the corner where the shadows pooled. Ethan stepped out slowly, instinct rising like an old ghost in his bones. He followed Hawk's line of sight. Something was wrong. The air tasted too metallic. The silence felt heavier than solitude. This wasn't a place left untouched for years. Someone had been here. Hawk stopped at the porch steps, nose hovering above the wood. His tail stiffened. He took a single step back, then lowered into a half-crouch, the same posture he used overseas when he picked up the scent of an intruder. Ethan's pulse kicked. "What is it, boy?" Hawk didn't look away. He nudged the same spot again. Ethan knelt. The wood was slightly darker there, damp in a way the rest wasn't. He pressed his fingers to the porch. A faint print. Boot tread. Not his, not Evelyn's. Fresh. He straightened slowly. The unease crawling under his skin sharpened when Hawk suddenly snapped his head towards the trees behind them. His bark exploded across the clearing. Ethan turned in time to see the silhouette of a black SUV, moving between the pines down the slope, tires cutting through wet leaves. The vehicle paused for half a heartbeat, as if checking to see if he had been spotted, then accelerated away. So much for solitude. Ethan exhaled through his teeth. The rain thinned into a mist that clung to his jacket as he walked towards the cabin. Hawk stayed ahead of him, not trotting but stalking, every step deliberate. His training never left him. Neither had Ethan's. The cabin door creaked as Ethan pushed it open. Dust swirled in the cold air, but the scent underneath wasn't dust. It carried something else, a trace of soap, a faint sweetness. Someone had touched things recently. Not long enough to clean, just long enough to disturb. Hawk padded inside, nose low, tail stiff. He sniffed along the walls, then stopped dead at the kitchen threshold. A deep growl vibrated from his chest. Ethan followed his gaze. A single mug stood on the counter. Dry. Clean. Ethan hadn't even stepped inside yet. His breath caught. His grandmother had been dead for over 2 weeks. The cabin had been locked according to the attorney. Yet someone had made themselves comfortable here. Hawk barked once, sharp and cutting, turning toward the small hallway near the back of the cabin. Ethan moved slowly, stepping with the same quiet precision that years in uniform had beaten into him. His hand hovered near the knife clipped inside his jacket. The back door was unlocked, one hinge loose, and the faintest smear of mud trailed toward the tree line outside. He swallowed the curse that rose in his throat. Who the hell had come up here? Hawk sniffed the floor again, then nudged the side of a cabinet. But instead of staying there, he stiffened. His head whipped toward the center of the living room, ears pinning to the top of his skull. Then he sprinted toward the floorboards beneath the window, claws scraping as he pawed at the wood. Ethan crossed the room and knelt. Hawk glanced back at him, then pressed his nose to one particular board. Not the door, not the outside. Something under the cabin. Before Ethan could speak, Hawk froze. The dog's muscles locked, and a quiet whine rose from his throat. Not fear, recognition. A single thud sounded beneath the floor, too faint to be footsteps, too heavy to be a mouse. Ethan's breath stalled. Hawk placed one paw on Ethan's boot, as if asking permission to react. Ethan whispered, "Do it!" The dog erupted. Bark after bark, chest deep and furious, aimed directly at the floorboard. Dust shook from the rafters. Outside, something cracked, a branch breaking under hurried weight. A shadow moved beyond the porch. Ethan spun toward the door, but by the time he reached it, the clearing was empty. Only the distant hum of an engine echoed between the ridges. Hawk returned to Ethan's side, chest heaving, fur standing tall. The amber in his eyes glowed with something fierce, alert, prophetic, as if he had already sensed the truth Ethan hadn't, uncovered yet. Ethan crouched, resting a hand on Hawk's neck. "Good boy. Whatever's going on here, we're not facing it alone." But as the cold wind pressed through the broken door frame and the whisper of tires faded down the mountain road, another thought crept into Ethan's mind. Whoever had been here wasn't running away. They were circling, waiting, and Hawk had seen them first. Night settled over Arrow Ridge like a lid closing on a box. The cold crept in first, sliding through the gaps in the cabin walls. Then came the kind of stillness Ethan Cole remembered from patrols overseas, a stillness that arrived before something shifted, before something broke. He sat on the old couch with a blanket around his shoulders, Hawk stretched at his feet. The fire crackled low. Outside, the wind threaded between the pines, carrying the faint smell of snow. For a while, it was quiet enough for Ethan to breathe. But only for a while. Hawk's head lifted suddenly, his ears snapped forward. Ethan froze, muscles tightening the same way they used to when Hawk alerted during night patrols. The dog wasn't reacting to wind. This was different. A soft sound rose from under the floorboards, a tap, then another, slow, careful, as if someone below was testing each movement. Ethan's breath thinned. He leaned forward, trying to catch it again. The cabin held its breath with him. Then came a faint exhale. Human. Close. Hawk growled, low and deep, the kind of warning that carried memory far older than the cabin itself. He moved to the center of the room, every step measured. He lowered his nose to a single plank near the stove. The same plank he had scratched earlier. The board was slightly raised, barely enough to notice. Just enough for a trained canine to lock on to. Ethan knelt beside him. Easy, buddy, probably just a critter. Hawk snapped his gaze toward Ethan. The look in his eyes was sharp, almost offended. This was not a raccoon, not a mouse. This was intention. A presence. Another tap echoed from below, closer this time. Hawk barked, chest bursting with sound. It shook dust from the rafters. Ethan rose fast, grabbing the flashlight. He swept the beam across the room. Nothing moved, nothing shifted. But the silence had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt watched. He pressed a hand to Hawk's flank. The dog's heart pounded under his palm. Not fear, readiness. All right, we check it in the morning. For now, stay close. Hawk didn't lie down. He positioned himself between Ethan and the floorboard, tail rigid, eyes locked on the plank, as if he expected it to split open. Ethan forced himself to settle, though sleep stayed far from him. His mind drifted back to Evelyn Cole, the quiet woman who had raised him for a few years before disappearing from town life. People whispered about her back then, about missing funds during the flood of '72, about her refusal to defend herself, about the night she left, and the way no one saw her again. Woman who never ran from truth, yet she ran from this town. Ethan rubbed his eyes. Maybe she knew something. Maybe it followed her up this mountain. A sudden slam jolted him upright. Hawk sprang to the door, barking so violently the windows rattled. Something had hit the front door. Hard, wood strained in its frame. Ethan grabbed the rifle from beside the couch. He moved to the door, Hawk pressed against his leg. The dog's teeth were bared, breath coming in sharp bursts. 3 seconds passed. Then another sound. The soft drag of fingers along the outside wood. Ethan counted silently. 1, 2, 3. He yanked the door open and stepped out. Nothing. The clearing glowed under moonlight, silent and empty. But the snow at the top step held the shape of a footprint. Fresh, crisp edges. Then another. And then, 2 paces out, the trail ended abruptly where the wind had swept across the ground. Ethan scanned the tree line. No movement, no breath, only the hum of cold air across the slope. Hawk stepped outside and sniffed the snow. He circled the footprint once, then twice, then turned toward the forest. His body lowered into a stance Ethan knew all too well. Tracking mode. Focus absolute. He wanted to pursue. Ethan pressed a steadying hand on his collar. Not tonight. Whoever came here wanted to be seen. Hawk resisted, pulling against Ethan's grip, but finally relented. His eyes stayed fixed on the shadows between the pines. They stepped back inside. Ethan locked the door, then wedged a piece of broken chair under the knob. Hawk continued pacing, unable to relax. Every few seconds, he glanced at the floorboard again. Ethan sat, running a hand through his hair. The truth landed slowly in his chest. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't paranoia. Someone had been inside this cabin. Someone had returned tonight. Someone who knew Evelyn Cole. Someone who didn't want Ethan here. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying a faint metallic smell. The same scent from earlier. Engine exhaust. Fresh. Hawk walked to Ethan, placing one paw on his knee, pressing down with quiet urgency. Ethan looked into the dog's eyes and understood without a word spoken. They weren't alone on Arrow Ridge, and whatever was hiding under the floor was only the beginning. Morning came without warmth. A pale slice of sun pushed through the fog, casting long beams across the cabin floor. Ethan had slept in a chair with the rifle resting beside him. Hawk didn't sleep at all. He paced until sunrise, nose pressed to the same plank near the stove, pausing every few minutes to shoot Ethan a look that felt like a nudge from fate. By the time the light settled, Ethan knelt beside him. "All right, show me." Hawk pressed his paw to the plank. Not random, not curiosity. It was insistence born of instinct sharpened through years of training. Ethan wedged his fingers along the edges, pulling at the wood until it groaned loose. Dust rose in a soft cloud. Underneath, darkness opened into a shallow space carved between the support beams. Hawk lowered his head and sniffed, nostrils flaring. Then he stepped back, making room. Inside was a metal box, heavy, green paint chipped from age. Ethan froze at the sight. It was military issue. A Vietnam-era transit chest, the kind used to transport classified documents or encrypted radios. His grandmother, Evelyn Cole, had never served. So why was this here? He lifted it slowly. The metal was cold enough to bite through his gloves. He set it on the floor, unlatched the locks, and eased the lid open. Hawk stood beside him, as if reading every detail with the same attention Ethan gave it. Inside lay folders, dozens of them, thick packets bound by string, some edges burned, others stained with water damage, each stamped with the same red mark across the top. Confidential. Ethan's breath caught. Flood Relief Fund Committee, 72. The year the town fell apart. The year Evelyn vanished. He pulled out one folder, pages filled with names, dates, transfers. Large amounts of money moved offshore, signatures that shouldn't have been there, and one name repeating across multiple documents: Grant Harlow, the former mayor, father of Leland Harlow, the most powerful man in this county today. Under the stack of papers lay a map. Ethan unfolded it across the floor. The parchment was old and creased, but one mark stood out. A black X drawn at the northern ridge of Arrow Ridge. Not near the cabin. Higher, remote, almost inaccessible except by someone who knew the mountain. Ethan's pulse quickened. What the hell did she find up there? Then a slip of paper fell from between the folders. Ethan picked it up, recognized his grandmother's handwriting immediately. Small, steady strokes shaped by a lifetime of quiet precision. If you are reading this, it means they have come back. His stomach tightened. He read it again. And again. The room seemed to shrink around him. Hawk suddenly stiffened. His fur bristled down his back. The growl that rose from his chest was deeper than before, more urgent. Ethan shot up, crossing the cabin to look out the window. The tree line stood motionless. But Hawk wasn't mistaken. His nose was angled toward the forest, body coiled, every sense locked on something Ethan could not yet see. A snap echoed through the woods, a twig breaking under weight. Too heavy for a deer, too slow for a fox. Ethan flattened his back against the wall, peering through the small crack in the window frame. A shape flickered between the trees. A figure, human, standing too still, too long, as if listening. Hawk gave a sharp bark that echoed off the ridge. The figure shifted. A jacket. A hood. Then nothing. The person slid back into the deeper woods with practiced silence. Ethan's skin burned with adrenaline. That wasn't a hiker. That was surveillance. He moved to the cabin door and checked the footprint from the night before. The edges had softened overnight, but the size and shape were still visible. Same tread pattern as the one he glimpsed near the trees now. Someone had returned twice in 24 hours. Hawk paced at the threshold, torn between guarding and chasing. Not yet, Ethan whispered. Let's think before running into a trap. But his voice cracked slightly, because the truth was no longer vague. It wasn't paranoia or coincidence. Someone had broken into the cabin. Someone had been under the floor. Someone knew what Evelyn hid. And now they knew Ethan had found it. Hawk returned to the open chest and nudged the folders with his nose, as if reminding Ethan the answers lay inside. Ethan knelt beside him again and placed a steady hand on the dog's back. You're right. This isn't a family inheritance. This is a mess she left behind. Something she wanted me to finish. He lifted the map again, eyes tracing the X on the ridge. A bunker. A storage site. A meeting point. Whatever lay there had been important enough for his grandmother to protect for 50 years. Another crack sounded in the forest. Closer this time. Hawk lowered his head, lips curled back in a silent snarl. Ethan followed his gaze and caught a flicker of movement near the fence line. The same shadow, the same hooded figure, watching the cabin, watching him. Then, in an instant, the figure darted away, disappearing into the trees again. But not fast enough. Not this time. Ethan saw something flash at the figure's hip. A radio. A small one. They weren't alone, and whoever monitored the cabin wasn't working alone either. Hawk barked again, sharper than before. A warning. A command. An alert honed through years of service. Ethan closed the metal box and gripped its handle tightly. All right. They know we found it. Now we find the rest. He glanced toward the ridge, toward the black X that waited in the mountains. And somewhere just beyond the clearing, hidden behind the veil of pines and frost, the watcher paused again. Listening. Waiting. Ethan felt Hawk's steady presence at his side. This wasn't just surveillance anymore. This was the opening move. The drive to Redwater Veterans' Home cut through a narrow stretch of prairie before the road climbed again. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind that made the land look older somehow. Ethan kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting near Hawk's shoulder. The dog sat upright in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting danger to rise out of the waving grass. The metal box sat wedged behind them. The weight of it seemed to shift the entire truck. And the note from Evelyn had burned itself into Ethan's mind. If you are reading this, it means they have come back. He had only one clue pointing backward in time. Walter Briggs, his grandmother's friend, a retired clerk, a man whose name had surfaced in the margins of the documents Ethan found. If anyone knew what Evelyn had run from, it would be him. Redwater came into view as a cluster of low brick buildings, with a flagpole leaning from years of Wyoming wind. Ethan pulled into the parking lot and killed the engine. Before he could step out, Hawk released a deep growl that made Ethan stop cold. "What is it?" Hawk stared at the far end of the lot. Ethan followed his gaze and saw a truck parked at an angle. No plates, windows tinted dark. Too clean for this place. Hawk's fur bristled. He pressed his nose to the glass, staring hard. Ethan scanned both sides of the lot. No movement, but every instinct in him said they had been followed. "We're not here long, buddy. Stay close." Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and old coffee. Residents shuffled through halls with nurses guiding them. Ethan approached the receptionist and introduced himself, asking for Walter Briggs. The woman nodded, her expression softening at the mention of Evelyn's name. "He talks about her sometimes. Not often, but when he does, you can tell it still hurts." Ethan's chest tightened. He followed the nurse down a long hallway to a small sunroom, where an older man sat facing the window. Walter Briggs looked fragile in a way that suggested life had chipped at him slowly. But his eyes were sharp, too sharp to be fading. "Walter," Ethan said gently. The old man looked up. His gaze drifted over Hawk first, assessing him the way only a veteran would. Then he rested his eyes on Ethan. "You're Evelyn's boy. I wondered when someone would come. There was no small talk, no introductions, only the weight of years settling between them." Ethan pulled up a chair. "I found something at the cabin. Documents. A map. Her handwriting. And someone followed me up there." Walter exhaled through his nose in a long, tired breath. "I hoped she burned those papers, but Evelyn was always braver than the rest of us. She hid them." "They weren't burned," Ethan said. Walter nodded. "Of course she did. She believed the truth would matter someday." Ethan swallowed. "What truth?" Walter's gaze shifted to the window, to the faint outline of distant hills. Arrow Ridge had a way of creeping into every conversation, even here. "The flood of '72, he said quietly. "The town was drowning. Bridges failed. Livestock gone. People had nothing left. The government sent relief money, more than this little county had ever seen. Only it never reached the people." Ethan leaned forward. "What happened to it?" Walter's jaw tightened. "Grant Harlow happened. He was mayor then, charming, untouchable. He funneled most of the relief money into a private account offshore, covered it up, blamed paperwork errors. People suspected, but no one had proof. But Evelyn did. Ethan murmured. Walter nodded slowly. She was the accountant assigned to track incoming relief funds. Sharpest mind in the county. She found discrepancies in the ledgers. Asked questions she wasn't supposed to ask. When she refused to look the other way, they turned on her. They? Ethan asked, even though he already knew the answer. Harlow and his allies. The sheriff, at the time. A few wealthy men around town. They threatened her, tried to destroy her reputation. One night, someone broke into her home. She came to me shaking. She said they told her to disappear or they'd make sure she did. Ethan felt the world tighten around him. His grandmother had been running from this place because she had been the only one standing against corruption. She left everything, Ethan said softly, and hid on the mountain. She didn't hide. Walter corrected. She waited. She always believed someone in the family would come back and decide the truth was worth something. Ethan felt the old man's words cut deeper than he expected. Before he could respond, Hawk jerked his head toward the window. His ears shot up. A warning rumble rolled from his throat. Ethan followed his gaze. A black shape moved near the parking lot. The truck with no plates. Someone was still inside. Walter's eyes darkened. You brought trouble with you. No, Ethan said quietly. Trouble followed me before I ever came here. Hawk barked once, sharp enough to make a nurse down the hall turn her head. Ethan moved to the window and watched as a tall figure stepped out of the unmarked truck. The man didn't enter the building. He simply leaned against the hood, lighting a cigarette, watching the entrance like he belonged there. Walter shook his head. They're scared. If they're watching you, it means they think Evelyn left something behind that can still expose them. Ethan's pulse hammered. She did. I found it. And they know. A shadow crossed Walter's expression. Then listen carefully. Do not trust Leland Harlow. He runs this town the same way his father did. He has eyes everywhere, and if you think they're playing games, you are wrong. They're cornered, and a cornered Harlow is dangerous. Hawk released another growl, stepping between Ethan and the window as a second man appeared beside the truck. They spoke briefly, then glanced toward the building entrance. Ethan stood. We need to go. Now. Walter reached for his wrist with surprising strength. Find what Evelyn marked on that map. That's where everything started and where everything ends. Ethan nodded once, then guided Hawk towards the door. The dog moved with fierce purpose, picking up the trail before Ethan even reached the hallway. Outside, the cold wind hit them hard. The two men near the truck froze the moment they stepped into view. One reached inside his coat. Hawk lunged forward, teeth bared, forcing the man to stop and flinch back. Ethan didn't break stride. He kept his hand near Hawk's collar, his stare locked on the stranger's. Not here, he muttered to the dog. But Hawk was already committed. His growl rolled like thunder. The men hesitated. Then, realizing the public eyes around them, they stepped quickly back into the truck and peeled away without a word. Ethan stood there in the cold, watching the empty space where the truck had been. Everything Walter had said pressed on him, with a new weight. This wasn't about a forgotten scandal. This was about a secret worth killing for. And Hawk, standing unshaken at his side, knew before Ethan did that the storm had only begun. The drive back up Arrow Ridge felt different this time. The sky had darkened early, clouds stacked over the mountains like steel plates. Ethan gripped the wheel, eyes cutting from the road to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Hawk remained upright in the passenger seat, gaze fixed forward, shoulders tense. He hadn't relaxed since leaving Redwater. When the cabin finally appeared between the pines, Ethan's heart dropped. The front door hung sideways off its hinges. Hawk erupted in a bark so sharp it rattled the windows. Ethan slammed the truck into park and jumped out, rifle slung behind him. Hawk hit the ground first, sprinting straight toward the porch, nose low, every muscle vibrating with alarm. Inside, the air smelled wrong. Not the usual dust and pine, something sharper, bitter, smoke. The living room was a mess. Drawers dumped onto the floor, cushions slashed open. The metal box overturned, documents thrown everywhere. Hawk weaved through the wreckage, sniffing hard, stopping at the stove where a pile of ash still glowed faintly. Someone had tried to burn the documents they hadn't finished. Ethan crouched beside the ashes, sifting through the charred edges. Only a few pages had burned, but the message was clear. They wanted the truth erased. A low growl rumbled from Hawk. Ethan turned. The dog stood at the hallway entrance, body stiff. His nose pointed toward a smear on the floorboards. A dark one. Blood. Ethan's pulse hammered. He followed Hawk toward it. The streak led to the back door, smeared along the wood like someone had crawled or limped through. The doorknob was bent. The frame splintered where a shoulder or boot had slammed against it. Outside, the cold air bit at Ethan's lungs. The ground near the back porch carried the faint smell of gasoline. Hawk moved to the fire pit and sniffed again before barking once. A corner of a folder lay half-burned beneath charred branches. Someone had tried to finish what they started but left in a hurry. Ethan scanned the tree line. Tracks cut through the thin layer of snow, deep and wide. Military boot tread. Fresh. When he stepped back inside the cabin, something caught on the breeze and brushed his boot. A sheet of paper, torn from a notebook, lay beneath the collapsed chair. He picked it up. "Don't dig too deep, Cole." Ethan stared at the words, jaw tightening. They'd dropped subtlety. This was a threat, a promise. Hawk growled again, ears flattening as he turned toward the floorboards. Not the loose plank where they found the documents. The opposite side of the room, near the corner. Ethan followed him. Hawk pawed at the floor, then looked up at Ethan urgently. Faster than before, more frantic. Ethan knelt and pressed his palm to the plank. Cold air seeped through, a draft. There was space beneath it, another entrance. He grabbed the crowbar leaning against the wall and wedged it under the edge. The plank lifted with a groan, revealing a narrow crawl space leading toward the back of the cabin. It smelled of dirt and mold, and something else. Accelerant. Ethan felt the hair rise on his arms. They hadn't just broken in. They'd planted something. Before he could stand, Hawk's body snapped upright. A hiss sliced through the air, then a glow. Flames burst along the back wall, racing up the old pine boards like they'd been waiting for the chance. The fire jumped fast, unnaturally fast, creeping along the floor as if pulled by wind from inside the walls. They had planned this. They wanted the cabin gone, evidence gone, Ethan gone. Hawk barked and lunged toward the flames, teeth bared, then circled back, pushing Ethan toward the opening beneath the floor. The dog wasn't panicking. He was commanding. "Move." Ethan dropped into the crawl space, feeling the cold earth swallow him. Hawk leapt in behind him just as the flames roared through the doorway overhead. The tunnel was narrower than Ethan remembered. His grandmother must have used it decades ago as an escape route. Now it was the only thing keeping them alive. Smoke filtered down through the planks, stinging Ethan's eyes. He crawled as fast as he could, hearing the cabin above them crack and groan. Hawk stayed ahead, guiding him, turning back to nudge Ethan whenever he slowed. A beam collapsed overhead, sending splinters through the floor. One shard plunged down and struck Hawk's leg. The dog released a sharp yelp but kept moving, refusing to stop. Ethan's throat tightened. "Hang on, buddy. Almost there." The tunnel sloped upward. Fresh air seeped through the cracks ahead. Finally, Ethan pushed against the loose rocks at the exit and broke through into the night. Snowflakes hit his face like cold needles. Hawk emerged right behind him, limping but upright. Ethan scooped his arms under the dog's chest, helping him forward as the cabin behind them roared into a full blaze. Flames climbed into the sky, painting the ridge in violent orange. Ethan stood in the snow, chest heaving, watching the home Evelyn had left him crumble in a matter of minutes. Someone wanted the past buried so badly they were willing to burn it alive. Hawk pressed against Ethan's leg, panting hard but steady. Ethan ran his hand along the dog's shoulders, feeling the tremble under his fur. "You saved us." Hawk lifted his head, eyes bright even through the smoke and pain. Ethan looked back at the inferno, jaw tightening. If they wanted a fight, they had just started one. And now Ethan knew exactly what he was walking into. Snow drifted sideways across the ridge as Ethan and Hawk climbed the last stretch of rock. The air thinned, colder with every breath. Above them, the silhouette of an old military bunker emerged from the fog like a slab of concrete carved into the mountain itself, a relic from the Cold War, forgotten by everyone except the one person who had left a trail straight to it. Evelyn Cole. Ethan steadied Hawk with one hand as they reached the door. The dog's limp was more noticeable now, but his posture remained upright, alert, ready. Ethan pressed a hand to the cold steel. Rust flaked under his fingers. Someone had forced the lock open before, years ago, or maybe days. He pushed it, and the door groaned aside. Inside, the bunker smelled of dust, oil, and cold metal. Ethan swept the flashlight across overturned desks, filing cabinets buckled by time, and shelves collapsed under sealed boxes. Papers lay scattered like fallen leaves, untouched for decades. Hawk trotted ahead, nose working the air. His hackles rose before Ethan noticed anything at all. "Easy, buddy," Ethan whispered. The dog didn't relax. He moved straight toward the far corner where a set of drawers stood intact. Ethan followed, tugged one open, and froze. Inside lay folders stamped with official seals. Relief Fund Disbursement 1972. Audit inquiry suspended. Emergency allocation code. All of it pristine, untouched by fire or time. He flipped the pages faster. Every line told the same story. Millions diverted. Shell contractors. False signatures. And on nearly every authorization line, the name Grant Harlow. Hawk's growl deepened. Echoes bounced off the concrete. Someone was outside. Ethan killed the flashlight and pressed his back against the cabinet. Hawk moved in front of him, teeth bared. The dog wasn't just growling. He was warning. Footsteps scraped against gravel. Slow, confident. Then a second set, heavier, tactical. A shadow crossed the doorway. Ethan whispered, "Stay low, boy." A figure stepped into the light. Tall coat, polished boots, scarf whipping in the wind. The face was unmistakable. Leland Harlow. His eyes flicked across the bunker and stopped on Ethan. A smile crept across his mouth. So the rumors were true. Evelyn's little Marine finally found the prize. Behind him, a man stepped forward, broader, carrying a pistol with practiced ease. A private enforcer, not law enforcement. No badge, no hesitation. Leland walked deeper inside, gloved hands tucked casually in his pockets. "You know, I almost admired Evelyn," he said. "She was stubborn, a woman who didn't know when to stop. Shame it runs in the family." Ethan stayed silent. He shifted slightly, keeping Hawk shielded between him and the angle of the armed man. Leland gestured toward the files. "Those belong to my father. They built this town. They saved it." Ethan's voice was low. They stole from it. From flood victims, from vets, from people who trusted them. Leland sighed, as though bored with the conversation. The wind moaned through the bunker door. That's history. Nobody cares about history, but we do care about problems, and you're becoming one. He nodded once. The gunman lifted his weapon. In that same second, Hawk lunged. The shot cracked, through the bunker like thunder. A burst of dust exploded from the concrete wall. Hawk cried out, hit mid-leap, but he didn't fall. Pain sent him stumbling sideways, but he pushed forward again, throwing his full weight into the gunman's arm, knocking the barrel upward. Ethan moved. He tackled the gunman from behind, slamming him into the filing cabinets. The pistol clattered across the floor. Hawk, bleeding, circled back, planting himself between Leland and Ethan with a snarl that echoed deep and primal. Leland cursed and reached into his coat for a second gun. Ethan drove an elbow into the enforcer's ribs, grabbed the weapon from the floor, and aimed it towards the doorway. "Drop it." Leland froze, gun halfway drawn. Ethan's voice was a razor. I said, "Drop it." For the first time, Leland looked unsure. Then a weak voice came from behind them. He never asked for any of this. Ethan turned. Walter Briggs stood in the doorway, leaning on a cane, breath trembling against the cold. He wasn't supposed to be here. He should have been in his bed at Redwater. But there he was, cheeks wind-burned, coat soaked with melting snow. Walter looked straight at Leland. "Your father forced me to sign those papers. We all lied, but Evelyn, she was the only one who fought back." Leland's expression cracked. He took a half-step back. Walter continued, voice shaking. "What your father did broke this town, broke families, broke Evelyn, and now you're doing the same damn thing." Ethan stepped closer, leveling the gun. "Leland, it's over." Leland's jaw twitched, calculating his odds. One injured enforcer, one armed Marine, a dog ready to tear him apart, and an old man carrying 50 years of guilt. Leland lunged anyway. Ethan fired once into the air, the echo shaking dust from the ceiling. Hawk leapt, teeth snapping inches from Leland's arm, stopping him cold. Ethan grabbed Leland by the coat, slammed him against the steel wall, and pinned him there. "You're done running people's lives." Ethan growled. He shoved Leland aside, dropped to his pack, and pulled out his satellite uplink device. He opened the metal box, grabbed Evelyn's files, scanned the pages, and uploaded every document, every signature, every diversion record. The connection lit green. Transmission sent, straight to the county sheriff's office. Walter leaned heavily against the wall, tears streaking his face. "I should have done this 50 years ago." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Evelyn never blamed you. She just never gave up." Behind them, Hawk wavered, one leg trembling. Ethan rushed to him, lowering to his knees. Hawk's eyes were steady, determined, no fear despite the blood staining his fur. "You're all right," Ethan whispered. "You did good, buddy. You saved us." Snow blew through the bunker doorway, swirling around them. Above Arrow Ridge, the truth Evelyn guarded for half a century was finally free. And for the first time since he'd set foot in the cabin, Ethan felt the tide turn. The fight wasn't over, but the mountain had just shifted in his favor. The wind cut hard across Arrow Ridge as Ethan carried Hawk down the mountain, one arm under the dog's chest, the other steadying his hindquarters. Hawk's breath came fast but steady, warm puffs against Ethan's neck. Blood from the gunshot had matted into the tan fur of his shoulder, but the dog refused to whine. Even injured, he kept trying to lift his head, scanning the trees as if still protecting Ethan. "You're safe, buddy. Just hold on. We're getting you help." Behind them, Sheriff Maria Colton's convoy began winding up the trail. The flashing red and blue lights bounced through the fog like ghosts returning home. Maria was the first out of her SUV. She strode toward Ethan with a purpose sharpened by years of frustration, betrayal, and suspicion toward the Harlow family. "Cole," she called, "I got your files. All of them." My God, you did it! Ethan staggered slightly under Hawk's weight. I had help. Maria's gaze fell to the dog. Her expression softened instantly. Hawk held her stare with those same steady, fearless eyes he used in combat years ago. She raised her radio. Get EMS up here, now. As paramedics sprinted toward them, officers rushed past Ethan towards the bunker. Minutes later, the shouts echoed across the ridge. Sheriff, we have Harlow. He's alive. Maria exhaled, a mix of relief and anger. Cuff him. Everything he says goes straight through me. Leland's voice carried faintly through the trees, panicked now, stripped of all the confidence he wielded hours earlier. You don't know what you're doing. Your father stole from half this state. Maria snapped. And you followed right behind him. Ethan didn't watch the rest. His focus stayed on Hawk as the paramedics eased the dog onto a stretcher, securing his injured leg. He tried to jump in front of a bullet, one medic murmured, shaking his head. Hell of a dog. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice tight. He does that. They loaded Hawk into the back of the rescue truck. Ethan climbed in without asking, settling beside him. Hawk rested his muzzle against Ethan's thigh, eyes half-lidded but alert. You saved my life today. Ethan murmured. Again. The sirens wailed as they descended off Arrow Ridge, leaving behind the bunker, the wind, and 50 years of buried truth that was finally rising into daylight. Hours later, the fluorescent lights of the Redwater Animal Emergency Clinic hummed softly. Ethan paced the hallway, shoulders tight, fingers locked together. He had survived firefights that should have killed him. Survived nights overseas where the sky felt like it was falling. But waiting outside a vet surgery room. That was a different kind of helpless. Inside, Hawk was fighting through sedation, muscle tremors shaking the table. A technician stepped out finally, pulling off her gloves. You can see him now, Mr. Cole. Ethan didn't wait. He pushed through the door. Hawk lay on the padded bed, his front leg wrapped, a brace supporting his shoulder. He looked up the moment Ethan stepped in, tail thumping once against the blanket. Slow, but strong. Ethan knelt and placed a hand on his chest. Good boy. You're tougher than anyone I've ever met. The dog blinked softly, pressing his head into Ethan's palm. Maria arrived a few minutes later, her hat tucked under one arm. She stood in the doorway, eyes damp. You two made it off that mountain alive. That counts for something. She handed Ethan a folder. This is the official statement clearing Evelyn Cole's name. Full exoneration. The state is reopening the relief fund case from 1972. And this will hit the papers at dawn. Ethan stared at the words. His throat closed. Evelyn wasn't just vindicated. She was respected again. Seen. Heard. 50 years too late, but finally right. Maria continued softly. People in town, those who remember the flood, the ones who lived through that hell. Many of them always suspected something was wrong. They just never had proof. Some of them cried when they heard the news. Ethan wiped a hand across his jaw. She never stopped fighting, even when everyone thought she was the villain. Maria nodded. And thanks to you, they finally know who the villains really were. They stood in silence for a moment. Hawk shifted slightly, letting out a quiet groan. Maria smiled. That dog deserves a medal. Ethan chuckled under his breath. He'd probably eat it. Outside the window, the first light of dawn broke over the Wyoming peaks, painting the snow in soft pink and gold. The ridge where everything had happened now looked peaceful, clean, almost healed. Ethan rested both hands on Hawk's fur. We're okay now, he whispered. We're not running anymore. Hawk's tail thumped again. Truth had finally cut through the dark. Justice had landed where it belonged, and the mountain that once felt haunted now felt like home. The healing had begun. Spring came late to Arrow Ridge, the kind of slow thaw that makes every creek sound like it's waking from a long sleep. Snow melted into clear ribbons down the mountainside, gathering in the old ravine where Evelyn once walked alone. But this season, the mountain felt different. Lighter. As if the truth Ethan had dragged into the sunlight had rinsed some weight from the earth itself. The cabin rose from the ashes like something rebuilt from memory. Ethan had spent the winter piecing together lumber, stone, and whatever remained unburned. He kept the bones of the old place, but let the light in this time, widening the windows, sanding the floors clean, hanging Evelyn's restored photograph by the door. Locals came to help without being asked. Veterans showed up with tool belts. Even the sheriff had picked up a hammer. They rebuilt it the way Americans rebuild their history. Not perfect, not pristine, but honest. The kind of place meant to hold stories. Ethan stood on the porch now, hands on his hips, looking at the sign he carved by hand. The letters were dark, burned gently into the polished wood. Evelyn Ridge Retreat, Veteran Recovery and Canine Therapy. It felt right. Felt like something she would have approved of. Behind him came the unmistakable clack of Hawk's brace, tapping the wooden floor. The dog moved with a slight sway in his step, but his posture was proud, tail lifted, eyes bright. The surgical scars were fading now, hidden beneath thickening fur. Ethan crouched beside him. "Looks like we made it, huh?" Hawk nudged his shoulder with a familiar weight. Then he trotted toward the yard where 3 young veterans stood, hands shoved in their pockets, unsure of how to start whatever healing they'd come here for. One of them, a kid barely in his 20s, knelt down slowly as Hawk approached. The dog stopped inches from him, studying, reading the tremor in the boy's hands, the tightness in his breath. Then Hawk eased forward and rested his head gently against the boy's knee. The kid froze, blinking fast. "I haven't touched a dog since I got back," he whispered. Ethan watched from the porch, something tight loosening in his chest. Hawk looked over his shoulder, as if asking permission. Ethan nodded. "Go on, buddy. Do your job." Hawk stayed there, breathing steady, grounding the boy with a kind of patience no human could fake. The kid's fingers finally sank into the dog's fur, and his shoulders dropped, tension pouring out of him like water. Another veteran, older, scarred from fire, wiped his eyes. Does he always know who needs him first? Ethan smiled. Hawk always knows. Inside the cabin, sunlight spilled across the new common room. A coffee pot bubbled softly on the counter. Bookshelves lined the wall. A stack of folded blankets waited near the fireplace. Nothing fancy, but everything intentional. People came and went throughout the day. A therapist from the VA, a retired sergeant teaching a workshop on rebuilding routines, local ranchers bringing fresh bread and venison stew. It felt like a living organism now, this place. A heartbeat returning. On the far wall hung Evelyn's ledger box, framed beneath glass. Next to it was a plaque donated by the county. In honor of Evelyn Cole. For courage, truth, and the lives she saved. Ethan paused in front of it, unable to stop the small pull of emotion in his chest. 50 years late, but finally right. By late afternoon, the veterans gathered outside for breathing exercises. Hawk moved among them, checking each person with the quiet authority of a seasoned soldier. The sun dipped low, touching the ridge with gold. Ethan walked to where Maria Colton leaned against her cruiser, sipping coffee from a thermos. "Place looks good," she said. "Thanks for pushing the zoning permit through. Wasn't hard. People here owe your family more than they realized." He nodded, watching Hawk escort another vet to a bench. The dog moved slowly on the injured leg, but without hesitation. Purpose gave him a rhythm no brace could interrupt. Maria eyed Ethan sideways. You ever think about keeping this open year-round? Word spreading. Ethan let out a quiet breath. That's the plan. Proud of you, Cole. He glanced back at the retreat, the faces, the laughter. This wasn't the mountain he'd arrived on. It wasn't the cabin he'd inherited. It wasn't the life he expected. But it felt earned. That evening, as the veterans gathered around the fire pit, Hawk limped to Ethan's side and sat tall, listening to the crackle and the low murmur of voices. The stars emerged one by one, sharp against the dark Wyoming sky. Ethan rested a hand over Hawk's shoulders. You did this, you know, he whispered. You brought them here. You saved more than just me. Hawk leaned into him, a quiet oath in the way he breathed. Spring settled around them, gentle and steady. A season of second chances. And on the rebuilt porch of Evelyn Ridge Retreat, a veteran and his dog watched the fire glow, their silhouettes carved into a story that finally belonged to them. The morning sun spilled gently across Arrow Ridge, warming the new porch of Evelyn Ridge Retreat. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine through the open windows, brushing against the freshly sanded floors. Inside, Ethan arranged chairs in a loose circle. Today wasn't a therapy session. Today was something else entirely. A yellow school bus groaned up the gravel road, stopping beside the old birch tree Evelyn had planted 50 years earlier. The doors opened, and a group of middle school students stepped out, clutching notebooks and camera equipment. Their teacher, Ms. Hartwell, waved cheerfully as she approached. Mr. Cole, thank you again for agreeing to this. Our students are doing a segment on local heroes, and frankly, this place has changed more lives than they can count. Ethan shifted slightly, a modest smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. Heroes is a strong word. I'm just building on something my grandmother started. Before Ms. Hartwell could reply, Hawk trotted out through the doorway, brace tapping rhythmically on the wood. The kids froze. A few whispered. One gasped. The dog stood tall, chest broad, eyes sharp. Not intimidating, just present. As if he was taking stock of each of them, recognizing nervousness, curiosity, and excitement like a language he'd once memorized. Is it okay if we pet him? A girl asked softly. Ethan gave a nod. Hawk closed the distance on his own, lowering his head so the children's hands could find him. Their giggles drifted into the trees. Hawk's tail swayed, and for a moment Ethan saw the younger, faster version of his partner, the soldier, the shadow that once patrolled desert roads with him. All right, Ms. Hartwell said, clapping her hands. Let's head inside and begin the interview. They gathered in the common room, cameras positioned on tripods, notebooks opened. One boy, the group's self-appointed reporter, leaned forward. Mr. Cole, our first question is, what made your grandmother a hero? The room quieted. Ethan exhaled slowly, eyes tracing the framed photo of Evelyn on the wall. She looked how he remembered her from childhood. Calm, steady, a little stubborn around the mouth. She didn't want to be a hero. Ethan began. She just refused to betray the people she served. During the flood of 1972, money meant for families who lost everything vanished. When she discovered where it really went, she tried to expose it. But powerful men silenced her. They forced her out of town, destroyed her name, took her voice. A girl raised her hand. Why didn't she give up? Because she believed truth matters. Ethan said, even when no one listens, even when it costs you everything. She hid the evidence, protected it for decades, so someone could finish what she started. The kids scribbled, eyes wide. Another student asked, "Did you know any of this before you moved here?" Not a word, but Hawk did. They looked at the dog, puzzled. Ethan continued, "Everything changed the moment he stepped into this cabin. He sensed things before I did. danger, secrets, even the buried evidence. He's the reason I found the truth. The reason I'm still alive. As if on cue, Hawk lifted his head from where he'd been sitting by the fireplace, his amber eyes locked on Ethan's. A silent acknowledgement. Ms. Hartwell cleared her throat gently. If it's okay, one of our guests from the retreat would like to say something. He insisted. A young veteran stepped forward from the hallway, leaning lightly on a cane. His name was Maddox Lane. 24. A machine gunner whose deployment had ended in fire and rubble. He'd stayed at the retreat for 3 months. He stood before the kids, voice steady but soft. I used to wake up every night thinking I shouldn't still be here, that maybe I left the better parts of myself overseas. But this cabin, and that dog. He paused, swallowing hard. That dog would sit with me when I couldn't breathe. He'd put his weight on my chest until the panic stopped. He'd nudge me outside when all I wanted was darkness. He saved me more than Mr. Cole knows. Hawk stood, crossing the room to Maddox. He pressed his head gently against the young man's thigh. Maddox smiled through damp eyes. One student whispered to another, "That dog's a guardian." The boy with the camera asked, "Mr. Cole, what do you want your grandmother's legacy to be?" Ethan looked around the room. Veterans resting by the window. Students scribbling notes, the smell of pine and coffee blending with morning light. I want people to remember her courage. Not just the kind that stands on stages or wins medals. The quiet kind. The kind that keeps you fighting even when nobody knows your name. I want this place to speak for her. And for Hawk to teach everyone who comes here what loyalty really looks like. Hawk sat beside him, straight-backed and sure, as if he'd been waiting for those words. Ms. Hartwell gave a final nod. That's perfect. Thank you. The students packed their notebooks, still whispering about the dog, the mountain, the unbelievable story they had just heard. As they boarded the bus, Hawk watched them go, tail flicking once, almost like a salute. Ethan rested a hand on his partner's back. You're part of her legacy now, he whispered. And mine. Hawk leaned against him, eyes bright with something unspoken, something old as instinct and deep as faith. Outside, the bus rumbled down the gravel road, dust rising behind it like a fading trail. The mountain stood quiet, proud. The kind of quiet that meant life had returned, not left. Legacy wasn't a statue or a headline. It was a dog pressing his weight against a broken soldier. It was a woman whose truth survived half a century. It was a cabin rebuilt stronger than before. Hawk looked up at Ethan once more. Ethan smiled. Let's keep it going, buddy. The studio lights were warmer than Ethan expected. Softer, too, with a kind of glow that made the small local news set feel almost like a living room. A backdrop of the Wyoming mountains stretched behind the desk, though the real Arrow Ridge loomed less than 10 miles away, breathing a quiet truth into everything that happened here. Hawk sat beside Ethan's chair, front leg still braced, chest rising and falling in a measured rhythm. He didn't seem bothered by the lights, the microphones, or the 2 camera operators circling the set like careful hunters. His gaze stayed forward, alert but calm, as if he knew this moment wasn't about danger. It was about telling the story. The anchor, a woman named Valerie Rhodes, adjusted her notes, glanced up, and smiled. Ethan Cole, thank you for being with us today. Everyone in the county has heard bits and pieces of what happened up on Arrow Ridge, but I want to hear it in your words, and I think people need to hear it. Ethan nodded once. His palms were steady on his lap. Hawk leaned into his leg, grounding him the same way he had grounded so many others. Valerie gestured to the camera. Let's start with the question people keep asking. Why did you risk everything up that mountain? For a moment, Ethan didn't answer. He looked down at Hawk. The dog tilted his head, amber eyes reflecting the studio lights. Something eased in Ethan's chest, the way it always did. He rested his hand gently on Hawk's head, fingers brushing the dog's thick fur. He wasn't barking at danger, Ethan said quietly. He was barking at the truth, long before I saw it. Valerie lowered her pen. The studio fell silent except for the hum of the cameras. Ethan continued. My grandmother. She carried a secret for decades, one that cost her everything. And Hawk, he felt it. He sensed what was wrong in that cabin, in that valley, in the walls people had built to hide the past. I didn't save anything. I just followed him until the truth caught up with all of us. A camera operator glanced at the monitor and slowly zoomed in on Hawk. The dog sat perfectly still, gaze forward, as if he understood he was now speaking without words. His eyes held a story older than the fire, older than the bunker, older even than the mountain behind them. Loyalty wasn't something he offered, it was something he lived. Valerie softened her voice. People say Hawk is a hero. Ethan chuckled under his breath. He's more than that. He's the reason I'm still here. The reason Evelyn got justice. The reason a lot of broken soldiers found their footing again. Hawker gave a small huff, almost a grunt. The studio laughed quietly. Valerie leaned forward. Last question. If there's one thing you want people to take from everything that happened, what is it? Ethan took a breath, the kind that draws up memories. The ridge, the fire, the bunker, the fear, the relief, the sunrise over the rebuilt cabin. He turned to the camera, eyes steady. Truth has a way of surviving, even when it's buried, forgotten, or burned, and sometimes it's a loyal heart that brings it back. He paused, letting his hand rest on Hawk again. So I'll ask you this. What's your story with a loyal pet? The words lingered like a vow. The studio went quiet. The director signaled cut, and the lights dimmed. Hawk rose, stretching stiffly, brace tapping lightly on the floor. Ethan scratched behind his ear. You did good, buddy. Valerie approached them, eyes still shining from the interview. That was powerful, she said. People are going to feel this one. Ethan smiled, modest but certain. Thank you. Outside the studio, evening light washed the parking lot in warm gold. The mountains stood in the distance, their outlines softened by the fading sun. Hawk stepped out first, nose lifted to the breeze, reading scents only he could understand. A small group of veterans stood near the exit, some with service dogs, others with families. They had watched the interview from the lobby, waiting. When Ethan and Hawk emerged, they straightened, a quiet respect passing through the group like a tide. You two changed this place, one of them said. Hawk walked toward them without hesitation and pressed his weight gently against a man whose hands trembled with lingering trauma. The man inhaled sharply, then exhaled as if letting go of months of darkness. Ethan watched as Hawk moved from one veteran to another, offering silent reassurance, grounding each person with the simple force of being present. This was the real story. Not the fire, not the bunker, not even the files that toppled a dynasty. It was this, healing that grew in quiet places, redemption that traveled on 4 legs, legacy carried by a dog who refused to give up. Ethan stepped into the fading light, feeling the mountain wind rise against his face. Truth had lived, justice had landed, and the ridge was no longer a place of shadows. As the screen faded to black in the final broadcast cut, Ethan's last words echoed. What's your story with a loyal pet? And from Ethan and Hawk, one final message for anyone watching. Support the German Shepherd community. Honor their loyalty. Share their stories. Because somewhere out there, a dog like Hawk is waiting to save someone's world.